different. So she's going to be giving us a little bit of a presentation as she comes in. And I'm in the dark here. You are in the dark. Literally. Alana here has got the spotlight on me. It's probably the best I've ever been on a spotlight in my whole bloody life. But
you ought to be careful someone might shoot you.
You look like a rabbit in the headlights though, PB. Why are you on the back of the truck with a gun in your hand? It didn't knock me off. So, I'd like to, first of all, before we get this underway, just to welcome you all here. I'll keep it very brief if I may. Thank you for all those who've come from the country. I've got two of them right here, Kalgoorlie and Geraldton. How far apart can you be? And the rest of you, I can see you in the dark, I'm sorry, but welcome along. Our next event, just for those of you that are mindful of it, is with Matty Ellis. And it's on the 23rd of October, I think, if memory serves me right. Someone tell me I'm right. Yes, it is the 23rd of October. And then following that, our last event for the year is on Tuesday, the 3rd of December, which is our breakfast with the property experts. So without further ado, I'm getting the nod from stage left that Madam is ready. I'd now like to welcome our life member and presenter for tonight, Valerie Haskins. Please make her welcome.
Come to me.
Give me everything I need. Give me a lifetime of promises and a world of dreams. Speak a language of love, like you know what it means. It can't be wrong.
I can take it straight over this one.
Take the heart and make it strong. We're simply the best. We're better than all the rest. We're better than anyone I've ever met. Stop down your heart.
And sorry, that's enough for frivolity lines, please. You can blame Dion for this. He posted something on Facebook and I thought, it needs a song. So there we are, we have a song, and I just want you to pay attention to thanking the relevant crew and cast of tonight's presentation, including our lighting for Alana. I don't know, did that work all right with Mr. Was he good? Excellent. Bit of soft lighting. Our best boy grip and gaffer in Mr. Britton. A set designed by AICWA. Fixer as usual, Dion. Cameraman Dylan Maynard, thank you Dylan. Catering by Chef Shane again. Supporting actors and crew include inventory controllers Doc Casely. Still photographs by Stu Trigg and a variety of other faces I've just seen taking photos. Thank you, Angie. Catering assistant is Angela Kingsford. Beverage supplier Leanne Rhodes, and the education support is Christine Bradbury. So please thank our cast and crew. So we're running, the first act goes from now till about 6:30, and we're going to discuss boring things like who is involved in the process, the Planning Commission, who they are and what do they do, time frames relating to the Planning Commission, LGA, Langate, and also our joint form of general conditions. There's an overview of the process from application for subdivision approval to issue of titles and what you need to do as a conveyancer. We're then going to have an intermission between 6:30 and 6:45, so toilet breaks, drinks, refreshments. There's plenty of food at the back if you're hungry. And our second act will run from 6:45 to 7:30, and we're just going to run through quickly 3 examples of some recent green title subdivisions, because I know, like me, whenever you get any of these, they always say they're so simple, and I've got to take my jacket off, it's hot. Isn't that fabulous?
Yeah. I'm not going to short, Isabel.
Pardon?
I'm not going to short out.
No, that's why I'm taking it off. I'll just turn myself off.
Does it have RCDs with it?
There we go. Great having good neighbours. Okay. So my usual classification disclaimer, it's rated M for mature audiences. It may contain coarse language, adult themes, and we've already had some bad singing. Before we start, we need to empty our brains of everything we ever knew about the Duties Act. There is no such thing in the Duties Act as no change in beneficial ownership. And I reinforce this point because I'm still getting calls from people saying, but why do I have to pay stamp duty? There's no change in beneficial ownership. So for one particular client, I actually went and researched the Duties Act, and there is nothing in there. And the lawyer I spoke to said that it was changed about 10 years ago.
11.
11 years ago? Thank you.
1st of March 2008.
So therefore, it doesn't matter if there is an apparent no change in beneficial ownership. Don't even think about that anyway. Do not proffer any advice on subdivisions, petitions or dispositions until you have researched the Duties Act and the Commissioner's practices, rulings and fact sheets, and also the Landgate Manual. Obtain a copy of the Commissioner's Practice DA 47, which was issued on the 17th of July, and it's titled Transactions to Facilitate Subdivision, and please pour your drink and be prepared to be bamboozled when you read it. I've read it about 3 or 4 times now and my head hurts every time I read it. So again, if you do get that Commissioner's Practice, don't use it unless you understand it, and there are parts of it I understand and I feel comfortable using. There are other parts I don't. Now, it does say in the Commissioner's Practice, because we discussed at the last session about terminations of strata plan incurring stamp duty, they've now got nominal duty applies to transfers and agreements to transfer the land if the Commissioner is satisfied the sole purpose of the transfer is to facilitate the subdivision of land. That was always the case, but they're reinforcing that now. And there will be a whole or partial retransfer of the subdivided lots to the person who contributed the land. They also had in here, nominal duty does not apply though with regards to terminations of strata plans unless it's a single tier scheme. So single tier schemes that are terminated, there won't be any stamp duty such as was highlighted in that SAT case. If you're terminating a strata plan that's multi-storey, there will potentially be duty issues. So they need to get some proper advice with regards to that. The application of nominal duty, as we all know, comes back to ensuring that everyone ends up with the same value and the same land or portion of the same land as when they started. And as I said, it's not a change in beneficial ownership. When dealing with subdivisions, please remember you are a licensed conveyancer who does precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. Very relevant if you're actually dealing with subdivisions, because it's been known surveyors don't necessarily know conveyancing. In fact, a lot of them wouldn't pretend to know conveyancing. And when we're dealing with subdivisions, we are dealing with information that's provided to us. You need to check the deposited plan, you need to check the parent title, you need to go back and in fact, as we always do, you have to check someone else's work, so don't rely on them getting it right. In our examples, it will show that surveyors do and lawyers do get it wrong, so you need to be checking everything. So in short, rely on no one but yourself. And tonight you will not leave here knowing how to do a subdivision, but you will live here knowing that you can never take things on face value and that at every turn you must do your own research, and if you do not understand what you're doing, please refrain from doing it. Get a number of telephone calls from people that are touching things they shouldn't bloody touch. But if you have time to go and research, have conversations with people that do understand how this works, please do that to educate yourself before you actually take a job on. So who was involved in the process? I make the emphasis there, one or more of these people must drive the process, because for those of us that have done a number of subdivisions, it's amazing how you find different people in the process drive it. Sometimes it can be the owner or seller. A lot of the time the owner or seller has been convinced to do this either by a real estate agent, a builder or finance person, and they have no idea what they're doing. They're relying on professionals. Surveyors are very good at driving it, but surveyors are also very good at doing nothing. So they will get it to a certain stage. If they don't get paid or they don't get further instructions, they'll stop working on it. The local government authority obviously doesn't drive anything, but they're involved in it, as are the Planning Commission. A builder can drive it. We've had one recently where the builder/architect drove the process, and thank God they did. The water corporation's obviously involved, Western Power, Langate. You have solicitors for the local government authority, who are another one that really don't drive anything and require... Excuse me, Debbie?
Ned Kelly's cousin with their fees.
They what, sorry?
Ned
Oh, Ned Kelly's cousin, my apologies. Yes, they are Ned Kelly's cousin regarding fees. We've got an example in one of our deposited plans we're looking at where a deed of restrictive covenant was drawn up. It was determined it wasn't required, but the client had to pay fees in to begin with. And when we decided it wasn't required, we asked for the money back, and funnily, we got a bill for $1,500. So be mindful. It's a big cost factor. We're obviously involved in the process, and we do tend to drive a lot of these things. Banks are involved, real estate agents can get involved, and I'm sure Liz and I have got a lovely story to tell of a real estate agent that was all over it. And you'll be pleased to know that's up one of our examples today, Liz. Town planners and engineers, obviously in a larger subdivision, you'll actually get more experienced people involved. And I don't know if anybody saw the Four Corners show on Monday night about the apartment issues, which was quite interesting and quite frightening to some degree, because as usual with everything, instead of people delegating work, they're abdicating their responsibility for certain stages of the process. I think in WA we've actually done quite okay from where the apartment buildings are. We've got some well-known builders. There's also some dodgy ones out there, but hopefully the things that they've highlighted in that report has not affected us as much, but it's certainly going to kill the apartment selling market. So the Planning Commission, we all know who the WAPC is. So they're responsible for determining applications for freehold and survey strata subdivisions. They may approve an application with or without conditions. They can actually refuse an application outright. An owner can ask the WAPC to reconsider their refusal and or any conditions, but there is a strict time frame, as came into play with the subdivision we were involved in. That if you get a WAPC approval, the one thing the owners need to do is read it with their professional people and determine if they're comfortable with the conditions. Most of them are pretty basic: connect to water, connect to underground power, make sure you don't remove a tree that looks pretty out the front yard, even if it's a box tree. So they have some reasonable conditions in there, but there are also other unusual ones that are coming in. A lot of the Planning Commission approvals now will be subject to NBN connections, so that's another thing that we need to be mindful of. So with regards to one of the examples we've got, there was a condition on the approval that stated that if certain areas of the land were in a high fire risk, then they had to have a restrictive covenant on there. So they commissioned reports at great expense, came back and said that these were not in a massive high fire risk area. So we argued successfully with the City of Nedlands that the restrictive covenant wasn't required. So we went to Planning Commission and said, no, we're not doing the restrictive covenant. The City of Nedlands have said we don't need it. And the Planning Commission said it's in the approval. It's a condition. You have to have it. So that lot now has a nonsense of a restrictive covenant on it. So again, these are things that all starts off quite simple and it can get quite complicated. An owner can apply to SAT for a review of a decision of the WA Planning Commission, and obviously the Planning Commission refers all of their applications to the LGA and service providers such as Western Power, Water Corporation and the Council for objections and recommendations. The Planning Commission is made up of 15 members and operates with the support of the Department of Planning. They delegate some of its functions to the Department of Planning, including decisions on subdivision and development application. So the 15 members that are on the Planning Commission obviously aren't sitting there approving your subdivision. They have staff, just as Langate have staff to actually approve those. You've got to hope during part of this process that your client and their surveyor has a very good relationship with the planning officer, because that helps get things done quite quickly. The WA Planning Commission also delegates some of its approval functions for strata developments to the councils, except for vacant lot stratas, vacant air stratas and multi-tiered strata schemes. Has anybody heard of those? So for example, this could be 2 strata lots here. So it's just essentially the walls around here, but the boundary of the lot runs right down the middle of the room, but there's no wall to show that that's where the boundary is. Why anybody in their right mind would buy into something like that is beyond me. I don't think we have a lot of them, but they are around in Perth. They also don't allow the LGA to get involved with developments within an area which is of state or regional significance. Timeframes. Now I know why I'm not a singer, I can drive. The WAPC have 90 days to make a decision. From our example, you will see that sometimes they take less time and sometimes they take more time. The approval is valid for 3 years for 5 lots or less, and the expiry date is shown in the approval letter. The WAPC approval is valid for 4 years for 6 or more lots. They don't grant extensions of time, and the LGA and others have 42 days to provide any objections or recommendations, hence why Planning Commission can sometimes take 90 days because they've got to go to the other people for comments. The approval will lapse if the owner has not submitted a survey to the Planning Commission for endorsement by the latest date. Now, we had a client ring up the other day and she contacted me, it must be about 18 months ago. I'm subdividing the block, my son's I've got to demolish part of the building and all the rest of it. So I'd followed her up quite regularly and got to the point where I thought I'm hassling her. So I'd laid off, thought no, when she's ready, she will come back to me. She came back to me 7 days before her Planning Commission approval was about to expire. Fortunately, I can't do anything about that. What she needed was clearances from the LGA, Water Corporation, all of those. Fortunately, she had a decent surveyor who, and I think the only reason this came up was the surveyor must have been going back through his files and gone, we've got a week. So she managed to get them into the Planning Commission with 2 days grace. So be mindful of that. When you get contracts in, sometimes they attach a copy of the Planning Commission approval letter, read it, highlight the conditions that are in there, whether you're a buyer or seller's conveyances, so you know what conditions need to be met, because as you will see in our examples, satisfying the conditions takes a long time. They also have 30 days in which to endorse a survey once received from Landgate. So as you would know, this clearances are all submitted. Surveyor puts the deposited plan into the Planning Commission and also into Landgate. Landgate check it and then they send it to the WAPC. They have 30 days maximum to sign it and return it to Landgate. In most cases they do it a lot quicker than that, but if you've got a complex subdivision they may take the full 30 days, so be mindful. We would all know as well that the survey at Landgate will lapse if you don't apply for titles within 2 years from the date the Planning Commission endorses the survey. So you might do a survey search and you have a look and you go, well, just do an application for titles. You go to Landgate and they go, sorry, DP's lapsed, which I think it will show on their records that it's lapsed anyway. But if you're not mindful of these things, it can slip through. We had another recent example where it was a mining area and the land was sold from one mining company to another on the condition that part of the land came back to the first mining company. We got brought into in February this year. The DP lapsed in May. It lapsed because they couldn't get the documentation organised, partial discharges and mortgages, transfers, assessments through state revenue. There just was not enough time for it. So that mining company has now got to go back to square one with Planning Commission, lodge a brand new application, get the surveyor to redraw the deposited plan, put it through all of the approval process again. And these things are not cheap. For 3 to 5 lots that I think it is at Planning Commission, it's $5,000. So when your clients are ringing at you and saying to you, I'm looking at doing a subdivision, just say to them, can you just go and meet with a surveyor and find out the exact cost? Because people just see the dollars at the end of it, not the dollars they actually have to fork out in between. Timeframes in the joint form of general conditions. Now I think Steve touches on this in the CPD, so we'll just obviously go through it. I think it needs to be emphasised. As I said to him, we need to make sure that you remind you that you review before you do. Because if you're not mindful of these timeframes, we can get caught out as well. So this clause only applies where the land is not a lot on the contract date. The contract is conditional upon the application for approval being lodged with the WAPC within 3 months from the contract date. Most of the time, the owners have already got approval by the time they go and sell a property. So that condition's usually met within time. Then it's got a further condition that within 6 months from the contract date, so 3 months to lodge, 3 months after that to get approval, and bearing in mind WAPC have 90 days regardless, that's a tight time frame. So they've got 6 months from the contract date to provide approval. And obviously, with regards to joint firm and general conditions, if you're looking for timeframes and you've got an off-the-plan contract, read that first, because that very possibly will vary all of the timeframes in the joint form and general conditions. Most of what we deal with are potentially 2, 3, 4, 5 lots, and the real estate agents wouldn't know about timeframes. So you need to be mindful if they don't extend these dates in the contract, then the joint form and general conditions provides the timeframes. Yes, Debbie?
I think when before we've been trying to clarify whether our client could get out of it, and we couldn't get confirmation of dates and all the rest of it, they wouldn't. And we contacted WAPC to try and get confirmation, and they wouldn't provide us with confirmation under the Privacy Act and all that rubbish.
Okay, and that's, I think, there is, I think, in the joint form a requirement, it might just be under this recent one, where the seller is obliged to keep the buyer informed. So if it's a previous joint form of general conditions, I don't know that it actually had that provision. But the question is, you know, and there's only certain parts where the contract automatically terminates if dates aren't met. Then there's other provisions where notice has to be given. So that's why you need to read these carefully, because as I say on the last dot point, if these 2 points are not met by those latest dates, it's an automatic termination. Nobody needs to give notice. But as it progresses further in the joint form, written notice needs to be given. So you need to be mindful of that.
So if you miss those dates by a month, it's still at an end even though you haven't done anything about it for a month?
Well, the way it's worded, it is at an end, but what you've also got to be mindful of, if you've got a willing buyer and a willing seller, then just say to them, listen, we can either just keep going or we vary it so that at least it keeps it in time.
But if you've missed it by a month, it's still relevant, it's still there.
Yeah, it's just, essentially the contract's at an end. And the risk is if you have got a buyer that's a bit nervous and wants out, and a seller that wants to hold on to them, it can be a bit dodgy. So just be really mindful of those time frames. And as I said, if those 2 points in the joint form are not satisfied by the latest dates, it terminates without need for either party to give notice, and the deposit must be promptly repaid to the buyer. Further, it's also, your contract is conditional upon the WAPC endorsing approval on the subdivision plan within 12 months from the date of the WAPC approval. Now, they can't endorse their approval on the subdivision plan until all of the conditions of approval have been met, and these can take 12 months and longer before they actually get met. So that's another date you need to be mindful of, and I think it's in one of our examples. WAPC endorsed the survey 6 days before that period expired. But again, I'll repeat this, in that situation, we had a willing buyer and a willing seller, and the buyer did not want out. So you've got to weigh that up. You give them what the situation is, their decision. If they want to take the avenue to give notice to terminate, that's their choice. Our job is to give them that information. The subdivision plan needs to be placed in order for dealing within 3 months from the Planning Commission's endorsal of their approval on the subdivision plan. And if those 2 conditions are not complied with, written notice must be given if the buyer or seller wants to terminate the contract. And again, all of these timeframes can be extended or varied by conditions in the contract. So be mindful there, those are the 2 things there. We've also got the Sale of Land Act changes, which now also come under the future lot contract clause at 13.9 of the joint form and general conditions. Applies where the seller is selling a property that they're not currently the registered proprietor of. Happens an awful lot in developments where somebody goes and makes an offer on a large parcel of land from mum and dad, then decides to put up a for sale sign out the front, or it could be an apartment building. They put a for sale sign up the front and try to get pre-sales to determine if they actually really want to buy this block of land. Now they've got to actually have a disclosure in approved form, or a warning, they call them warnings and conditions and disclosures, advising the buyer that the seller is not currently the proprietor of the lot, and they must also include a condition that the seller will become the proprietor by a certain date. Now, if those warnings and conditions are not included, the contract is illegal and void, that is not valid or legally binding. The big thing for sellers, if you have got anyone that comes to you and says, I've got an offer to buy this commercial property down in, well, we actually did one in Carlisle. They put it under offer, had due diligence period for about 6 or 8 months or whatever it was, and quite a long settlement time, and they wanted to test the market. And this Sale of Land Act change had only just come in, so we said, off you go to a lawyer and make sure that all your disclosures and notifications and warnings are put in there. Because in researching for this, for another presentation I've done, it's $100,000 for each offence. So there's like 4, I think, notices, warnings, that sort of thing that needs to be in the contract. You don't put those in, that's $400,000.
Per contract.
Per contract. Actually, I'm not sure whether it would be per contract, Debbie, but it's a good point. It could very well be. But, you know, if you want, your client wants to... Well, the thing is, well, you look at that $100,000 for one offence, it's going to cost you $100,000 in legal fees to get it right. So these are things that you need to be obviously keeping your client informed about. Proposed strata lot. Now, the joint form of general conditions defines a proposed strata lot as a lot on a strata plan which is, on the contract date, has not been registered at Landgate. Those clauses listed there apply to a proposed strata lot. 13.9 also applies where a proposed strata lot is also a future lot. So off the plan apartments tend to be in this sort of way. So the strata lot provisions would apply as well as the future lot provisions. 13.6 of the joint form states the strata plan must be registered by the date referred to in section 70(4) of the Strata Titles Act. And you go to 70.4 and it says by the date referred to in the contract. And then it goes on to say that if no date is specified, the strata plan must be registered within 6 months from the date of the contract. Mum and dad investors would not be able to get a strata plan registered in 6 months from the date of the contract. They're just very excited that they've actually got an offer, so they just want to proceed. So again, any contracts that come in, particularly for smaller schemes, be very mindful of that 6 month time frame, because an awful lot of people don't meet that time frame. If the strata plan is not registered by the latest date, the buyer may avoid the sale at any time before the strata plan is registered, and the Strata Titles Act under the Purchasers Protection provisions cover that. And it'll be interesting actually with the changes in the Strata Titles Act, because there's a few developers were not happy about the ability of buyers to walk away when timeframes weren't met. So I think I don't know what the latest provisions are, but they're actually quite onerous with regards to giving notice, and onerous from a time perspective. So if you actually find out there's, you know, the buyer hasn't been given notice of something under the contract, and you say, well, do you want to walk away? And they go, absolutely. There's a section in the Strata Titles Act that covers that, but there's only a time frame of about 7 or 10 business days. That's not a lot of time for John Smith off the street to go and find a lawyer that he can understand, get advice and issue notice within those 10 business days.
But
So,
it's interesting because it's one right back the other way. Because 10 years ago, Doug Solomon was doing his absolute ultimate best to cancel every contract so that the seller could go back to the market and realise a greater price.
and that's the big change with the way our market is.
Right, so badly the other way.
Because they always used to have, and they're not allowed to have them now. Someone was telling me the other day it's illegal to have a sunset clause.
Yeah.
And a sunset clause is the catch-all.
Yeah.
If we haven't sold, or if we haven't got the strata plan registered by this date, we, the seller, reserve the right to terminate the contract. Now, back in the boom days, they were terminating contracts left, right and centre, and sellers were actually purposely delaying registering the strata plan because they knew they could cancel those sales, resell for a higher price. So they were the sort of things that they really needed to stop occurring. But now with these new changes, it's going to be interesting to see, because I think, it's gone.
Can't terminate under the same provisions.
Sorry, Sue?
Sellers can't terminate under the same provision as buyers.
There's buyer's protection in the Strata Titles Act, so that's the only way they can terminate. The seller will have other clauses under the contract by which they can terminate, because it's their contract. They will write it to suit them. So they'll have their usual get out of jail clauses. If we haven't pre-sold by this date, we'll bring it to an end. If we haven't got approval, we'll bring it to an end. So they'll have those clauses in there, but they now apparently no longer can have a catch-all clause, that because the market's gone rampant. And I had, I don't think it was Beaufort Central, but one of the ones down Beaufort Street, they did that a lot, because we actually back then as well had a lot of Eastern States people coming to WA, because even though our market was hot, it was still better value for money than what was in the East. And we had about 4 or 5 buyers who had all of their contracts terminated, got their deposits back, and they were ringing up going, what the hell's happening? So they started a class action. I know that it went on for a couple of years. I don't know whether they succeeded in anything, but there was a lot of that going on back then. I think now sellers will probably do anything to keep a deal together. So at least our buyers might have a little bit more sort of clout.
The sunset clause is still okay, but it's more to protect the buyer rather than the seller.
Yeah, well, they probably don't call it a sunset clause anymore.
Yeah.
They'll have things in there that couch in that. So, as I said, if you have got small subdividers, small developers that you're doing work for, be mindful of these provisions. 13.7 under the joint form refers to the obligation to construct the development, and again in off-plan contracts there will be a hell of a lot more information in there. So please read clause 13 of the joint form of general conditions.
But it wasn't like there's 6 months you could vary that clause and extend that time. You can still do that, can't you? It's not like it's against you just extend the clause.
Yeah, so if there is no time frame in the contract, so you're relying on the joint form, you can vary it later. So if you're a month out and you know you're not going to meet that time frame, then yes, you get it varied. The only thing you've got to remember is to make sure you do have a willing buyer and seller, because if one of them wants out for whatever reason, they may not necessarily agree to that. But there is nothing stopping you varying the joint form of general conditions after the contract has been entered into. Okay, GST withholding on residential properties. We should all have this down pat now. Some of us... The real estate agents are still not ticking a box. Well, REWA covered that, didn't they? They knew that real estate agents were not going to ask the questions to tick the right box. Now, I do a settlement presentation to real estate agents through West Coast Property Training. This is one of the things that we cover, and I stand there and I plead with them and say, would you just tick a box? Now, most of them sort of glaze over it, and what astounds me is I've gone from these very experienced people in the room, and I have one small group, and we talk about trusts and the need to show the name of a trust on a contract. Oh, sorry, Sarah, I don't want you. So they, I've said to them, you know, where did I get up to? Thank you, I'm glad you were listening. So I said to them all, you know, we're talking about trusts and super funds and all the rest of it. Can you put your hand up if you actually dealt with the trust? 24 people, not one hand went up for a company as a buyer or seller or a trust. And I was astounded, because I just thought at least somewhere someone's dealt with that. But so therefore we obviously went into that with a little bit of detail. So yeah, so I'm attempting to get them to tick boxes, but I think I looked at 3 files today and I think 1 was ticked.
I think the problem is too that settlement agents also tell real estate agents it doesn't matter if you don't tick one, because 2 applies.
Well, that's the fallback position, is that if no box is ticked, then it doesn't apply.
Yeah.
My problem is that's lazy,
It is.
because you haven't asked the question. Yes, Peter?
We've taken some legal advice on that, and our lawyers say don't rely on that. No,
Yeah.
no election.
The ATO has changed their ruling on that too, Val. I wrote to John O'Connell with the ATO and I presented to CPD. The requirement for nominating yes or no must be in writing. So if there's no box ticked, it's not in writing.
Well, there you go. We all learned something.
That's about to change. The next rollout, John Jono has written to REWA, mainly in REWA, because they seem to be the main offenders, to say that this is not entirely in accordance with the Tax Administration Act.
Yep.
It must be a declaration in writing, yes or no. And by not ticking the box, that is not a declaration in writing, and hence that will be clarified.
And you want to push it back this way?
Yes.
It will take a while for the wheels to turn, but it is.
Yes.
It's already happened. I've got one today where boxes have tipped and the real estate agent comes to me and says, oh, can you get a GST withholding form signed? My client, who is a buyer's gone overseas, sellers wherever, down Albany, and I know it's a strata title unit in a block of 4, so it's about 30 years old, the property. I've Googled it and looked it up, so I know it
doesn't apply. And I think that's, you've got to come from that position.
No, I can't get a withholding.
And I think that's the problem, is we've got to be sensible with it, except legislation doesn't allow you to be sensible. As someone, I spoke to a lawyer the other day, Stuart Leonard, about the duties, IOSR, not applying the duties the way it should be for termination of strata plans. And he said, what is it about them that he said they can pick and choose when they want to use the law and when they don't want to use the law? And I thought, that's actually a really good point. So no doubt we'll get some more information from the AIC when this changes. It is a bit of a, most of the obviously residential homes we're dealing with, it doesn't apply, no harm done, but the legislation requires it to be done, and it's just another thing that we have to do.
And
Ticking off all of those
I put it back on
forms.
the settlement agent at that point in time. I mean, my seller is actually acting as EPA for his mother, who's had to go into
Yeah,
nursing.
we're going to have to keep going, sorry Carol, and we're recording so some of this doesn't get picked up. Can you wave at me if you're starting to get mumbled down there? Okay, so back to GST withholding. Oh, I moved, didn't I? Only applies to residential properties? Yes. Requirement to disclose applies to every seller. Sale of the property needs to be a taxable supply, including the seller needs to be registered for GST. This is an area of it that can cause an awful lot of confusion, is small lot subdivisions may be caught up in the provisions if the ATO deemed the seller to be carrying on an enterprise. And in writing an article on GST withholding, I researched enterprise and on the ATO website, and I didn't like what I read. So I ended up not going down that avenue other than actually saying to people, you need to get some legal advice. If you are in the business of buying properties, knocking down houses, doing a 2-lot subdivision, I don't care that you do it with a different company every time you do it, or that you're doing it in a different name, you need to go and check your own advice, or get your own advice, because it is very possible that some of those sellers are carrying on an enterprise. So that's one question. The second question then is, if they're carrying on an enterprise, do they need an APN, or they're entitled to get an APN? But then, are they required to be registered for GST? We can't answer those questions. We can pose them and send them off to their accountant. I know that a lot of accountants are struggling with this as well, so we can just put it back to them, get the advice and come back to us. So as I said, make sure that your seller seeks proper accounting and legal advice and doesn't get it from the real estate agent as a developer of ours did. And he was selling land up to 1st of July, 1st of July hit, GST withholding came in, first contract comes in, margin scheme. And I rang him up and said, did you get advice on this? And he went, no, the real estate agent said the margin scheme. I said, you bought the land and you paid plus GST, which means you cannot apply the margin scheme. Really? Yep. Googled it, as in, the ATO website, sent him through the link to the page. So we had to get we didn't get the annexure changed, we just informed the purchaser side. The GST annexure is wrong with regards to the amount. The amount should be this. We credited the right amount. So there's things like that just because it's filled out in a form, sometimes we can assume, but it comes back to knowing your clients, I think. Yes, Debbie?
We have one too where they hadn't done anything about it because the agent wasn't sure what to do, so they just left it blank. But in the end, our clients had to register GST, but if we hadn't realised that at the time of settlement, they wouldn't have been able to apply the marginal scheme which they were entitled to, and therefore they wouldn't be able to, their GST payable was different. So although they were criticising me up front, it ended up saving the money because otherwise they would have had to pay 1/11 rather than...
And that's the thing, they've got to actually weigh all of these different things up. We've got an example recently, this same developer assists other people doing developments. He does it as a business. And so he's doing one for these two owners. They own 2 strata lots. They're going to subdivide and create 3 lots. And they're going to have one house they'll own together, and they'll end up with a property each. So he's now currently going through do they register for GST? Because during construction there's an awful lot of GST paid that they can recoup back. But the downside of that is when they go to sell these places, they have to pay withholding tax to the ATO. So that's why they need to get advice, because it is far more complex than normal commercial GST, which is a doddle in comparison with this. So please make sure that they're getting the relevant advice. Now your role, lodge the Form 1 via the ATO website and provide a copy to the seller's conveyance. So please do it without me asking.
Can this be transmitted to every single bloody member? I'm sick of making phone calls.
I would feel your pain, Liz, with the amount of developers you act for. So please, can we just spread... Happy to send this around to everybody. You have to make sure we're providing this information. The one thing I love about PEXA is it gets paid from PEXA. Make sure you're checking that it is being paid from PEXA. But you need to be on to that. And I just think the easier or the earlier we proffer information rather than being chased for it, once you've done the form comes back, forward an email. You don't need to put any lovely words in it. Here's your Form 1. Thanks very much. I love it. Now, lodge the Form 2 after settlement. Don't forget the Form 2. I didn't know how important the Form 2 was until one of our developers rang and said, I'm just ticking off the GST withholding against my integrated account. There's 3 of them missing. Well, I know they got paid. They got paid through the PEXA website. Went back to the file. No Form 2. So we then went back to the settlement agents. The 3 of them hadn't submitted the Form 2. They'd forgotten about it. I hadn't followed it up. So then they just submit it. It's a 5-second form online. But then the ATO will take, 42 days to allocate the payment from their holding account to the integrated account. So the Form 2, to some degree, is actually more important than the Form 1. And also send a copy of that to the seller's conveyancer, please.
And confirmation of receipt of payment too.
That's my next one, Deb. You're up with it. So, no, you're fine. So then you'll also get an ATO receipt that confirms the payment has been received. Eventually, yeah, it takes a little time. But when it comes in, it will pop up in your inbox. Even if you haven't diarised to chase it up, please also send that to the other conveyancer. The overview of the process from Planning Commission approval to issue of titles and timeframes.
Go back to the GST. Can you please make sure that you check the amount that they've put on the form is the correct amount? I've had 3 where it's not been enough.
Okay, so...
I looked at the figure and gone, this isn't right. They've done 7% instead of 10%, and they've gone, oh no, we deduct that off first. And I've gone, no you don't. You pay 10 and then you get it back on your end.
Well, it's actually 1/11th. Yeah.
But they had it wrong.
And that's actually a really good point. Thank you, Steve, for sharing that. Make sure you're checking the amount that is on the Form 1. With regards to the developer whose real estate agent was charging the margin scheme and shouldn't have been, I sent an email immediately to the buyer's conveyancer and said, please note the GST withholding amount's incorrect. Chased up a few times to get them to lodge the Form 1, finally got lodged the Form 1, wrong amount. So I referred them back, and they actually, what made me laugh is they had replied with the Form 1 to my email that had in the reference line, GST withholding amount should be this. Blind Freddie can read my emails. So yeah, so please check the amount. They can go back in and amend it, I presume. I can't remember now. So start again. If you get the amount wrong, start again. Thank you.
Ring the ATO. They'll help you cancel it.
Okay, so for those that might be watching this later, if you get the amount wrong, ring the ATO, they'll help you cancel it and then resubmit a new form.
And the ABN, do an ABN search before you start on the form, because the ABN that's noted on the notification might not be the entity that they've also put on that notification.
No, because there's no tax invoices. All right, sorry everyone. So we're checking the amount that's on the form, and we're also checking the ABN. Sorry everybody, can we have you to the front?
And reference numbers.
Yep, so payment reference numbers in PEXA. God, this list goes on, doesn't it? Check the amount, check the ABN number, check the payment reference number in PEXA. Anne was just asking about tax invoices. Tax invoices aren't provided for this. It's different to the GST where you get a tax invoice. But we are relying on real estate agents completing the form and they don't always get it right. So please use it as a learning opportunity. Anything else on GST withholding?
I mean, so not on GST, but on your tax invoice when it's a commercial property, just make sure you get it. You know what I mean? Like, like, there's like people who some people have gone, it's got to get the GST tax invoice, or we've received it and given it to a client, but the ABN number is not.
Yeah. So in short, don't trust anybody. Check everything that comes in your inbox, including your water rates, council rates and everything else. Don't rely on anybody. Check everything. All right, come on, we've got to move along.
Don't use Bunnings ABN.
And don't use Bunnings ABN. Fair enough. All right, so time frames. Planning Commission approval we've talked about is 3 months. Comply with all conditions will take between 3 and 12 months depending on what the conditions are. Conveyancers should be appointed during the time the conditions are being complied with. So if you're actually getting a call from a client, I'm going to subdivide, should be close to getting titles in 3 months, 2 months out, get the name of the surveyor and start communicating and preparing documents. The surveyor does a final survey, which obviously takes a matter of days. They do a draft one that goes into the Planning Commission. They then do a final one a bit later. Sometimes the final survey can have 3, 4, 5, 6 drafts. You should start preparing your documents and liaising with all parties, including the mortgagee, on titles before all the conditions are met. Now, I know that the mortgagee won't provide consent or title production in most cases until your survey's in order for dealing, but it takes a long time to actually find out who the bloody hell in the bank you need to be dealing with, so do that early. Request, so they also obviously there needs to be clearances obtained from the various authorities and they can take days to weeks. So again, time frames. Once all the clearances are received, sorry, can we just keep the chatter down because it'll get picked up on the recording? I'll get my stick out in a minute. So once all the clearances are received, the surveyor lodges the clearances with the Planning Commission. This is all done electronically now. And if you do require a replenishment of drinks, please signal over to our gentlemen over there and they'll be glad to refill you. The surveyor also lodges the gentlemen, I did say. Refill you, yes. Fill you up, charge your glasses. The surveyor also lodges the survey with Landgate and Planning Commission, and from experience I can tell you that the surveyor doesn't always do that until he's paid. So if he's being a bit late in lodging it, you need to be establishing whether he's being paid. I don't blame them for holding it up, but I'd like them to tell me that's why they're holding it up. If it's lot sync, and don't we hate lot sync, conveyancer also lodges the applications and other supporting documents with Landgate. Now, I don't know about you, but I'd much rather go down the traditional avenue of lodging an application. Lot sync is okay if you know how to read a deposited plan and it's simple and you trust the surveyor's got it right. So traditional, as we all know, means that the deposited plan is lodged with Landgate first and is examined, and then once it's marked examined, it will then have the comments on there about the documentation that you might need. So if you're not an experienced subdivision person, don't go down lot sync because guaranteed you'll forget one of the documents you need to provide. If using lot sync, it's very important to ensure the parent title is reviewed thoroughly and that the survey covers any encumbrances that need to be brought forward, and watch out for new encumbrances created on the survey because you need to know whether you need other documents from other people. From experience, surveyors can and do make errors when drawing up surveys, so do not rely on them. Dan Grogan, who I think has retired, was the best surveyor I've ever dealt with. And every time he sent a survey through, before he did anything with it, he'd send it to me and he'd say, can you look at this with your conveyancing eyes? And the number of times we picked up little things, nothing major, but things that could have caused a problem later that he needed to fix. So if you can have a good relationship with this surveyor so you work in tandem, it's worth their weight in gold. Now, Langate examine the survey and send it to the Planning Commission. Now, as you will all know from their timeframes, it's about 15 to 20 working days. No, it's not. It can take a lot longer than that. So if you want urgent examination of your DP, there is a process in place. It works, and Langate do examine DPs quickly. From our examples, you will actually see that as well. So I keep an eye on the turnaround times on the Langate website for a variety of reasons. We did a lost title application that was lodged out at Midland, and they said, oh, it's about 3 days, which we knew was not true. And now it's around 11 days on their website. I thought that didn't take long to change. So once it goes to the Planning Commission, they compare the final survey, the clearances, to their approval. So they are matching it up. So if you haven't got everything, or if the surveyor at this point has not got all the documentation into the Planning Commission, they will wait for additional information to come in. So they have, as I said, 30 days to do their comparisons. 2 lot schemes are going through quite quickly. If you've got a larger scheme, it might take them their full 30 days to actually weigh up, to compare the things. Langate placed the survey in order for dealing, and then they process, so WPC will sign off and return to the survey to Langate. Langate at that point will put the survey in order for dealing, and if lot sync, they will then process the application and issue titles. It used to be when lot sync first started that it was only a few days. Now anything on their website says 10, 15, 20, 30 business days. And when they introduced lot sync, I remember looking at it thinking, you're waving at me? Oh, 5, sorry, thank you. That's right, we're nearly there, we're whiz through. They used to actually get through things an awful lot quicker the way they used to do things. Anyway, we'll carry on with that. So anyway, once the survey's status is marked approved, that's when we know the titles have issued. So what the conveyancer does, again, you do precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. Keep that in your mind.
Are you selling these t-shirts?
Yeah.
I'd love to get one of those. Wear it into the city. So you prepare the applications for titles and any other documents that may be required, such as transfers of land. You need to liaise with the owner's bank to obtain consent or production of a title, and please note, if there is no dupe CT, you're not going to get a title produced, you're going to need consent. If required, you may be required to arrange a partial or full discharge of mortgage. Your job will also involve dealing with the lawyers for the LGA to obtain and arrange execution of documents such as easements and covenants. If it's clear title, you need to obviously get that from the owner, who's no doubt lost it, and you've got to do a lost title application as well. You then get all of the original documentation, and you arrange potentially a joint lodgement at Langate if people don't trust you to lodge their documents. Yeah, exactly. Charge big, people, charge big.
On the plan, where it says just take special attention to, is there a management statement? Yes
Oh, yeah.
or no?
So yes.
It's a little thing that you yes or no.
So on strata plans, when you have a look at it, check if they've ticked the box for management statement, then go to the second last page where they'll have the document number. I think it might be on the first page as well. And make sure you're ordering those and reading them too.
And if you're lodging the thing for doing the application to register the plan, if it says yes, you've got to have the management statement.
Oh yeah, so if you're lodging an application for strata title.
If you have a management statement, you have to have all the consent correct of everybody, yes, which includes the Water Corporation if they've got a registered easement.
So there you go. Simple. If any transfers are required, you have to prepare them and get them signed and arrange for them to be assessed for duty. And we all know how long that's taking at the moment. You obviously lodge the documents with Langate, and if required, you request urgent processing. Once the title's issued, you should notify all interested parties, including the real estate agent. Now, I've added that on there about informing the real estate agent, because I did have a settlement agent ring me and she said, We did this application for titles. One of the properties has been sold. The real estate agent rang up and said, can I have a copy of a title search? And she said, why should I share them? And I said, because you fucking got them. Send them to the real estate agent. What is the problem? You've charged the client. The real estate agent has made, in my view, a very reasonable request. It's not going to cost you anything to forward the email to them. So please do that when they've actually issued. Now, a bit more music now. So we're going to go through to intermission. So please replace your glasses. Oh, it's not on. It's all right. Them didn't, but they then went to learn. So it's a good way to learn. So we're going to run through 3 recent subdivisions. 2 we acted for the seller. Last one we acted for the buyer, and Paul Liz got the short end of the string with acting for the seller. And at the end of this next 45 minutes, you'll realise what appears to be on the face of it a simple 2-lot subdivision is never really that simple. At the subdivision presentation I do with real estate agents, which is a 3-hour one of the agents who has been involved in development, so he was quite experienced, and his comment was, 5 years ago, this was oh so simple. And I thought we can all say that from our respective professions, that 5 years ago we were not filling out all of the documents that we actually have to fill out. So it's nothing simple and it's not cheap. If you are doing subdivision work, please charge, and charge high, because you will earn it. If you're involved in any subdivision work, please obtain a copy of the Planning Commission approval so you can see the date it was approved, when it expires, and the conditions the seller must comply with. And obviously that helps you watch out for any additional documentation you may need to prepare. Our first one was a 2-lot green title in Mount Claremont. The application for approval lodged on the 26th of October 2017, with approval given 4 months later. The conditions were to demolish the house, obtain the BAL reports, or the bushfire alert level reports, and decommission septics. Clearances were required from the Water Corp, Local Authority and Western Power. The documents were required were a notification, restrictive covenant, an application for titles, consent from mortgagee. And as our meerkat says, simples. Piece of cake. In this scenario, the seller had no idea, and in fact, he may have been a good footballer, but a subdivision person he was not. And he said to me, Valerie, I have no idea what's going on. Can you please drive it? Quite happy to do that, charged accordingly. Fortunately, in this one, the architect and builder drove this matter. Contract for this one was signed in June 2018. The borrower was what we now call a foreign individual. That worked in our favour with all of the delays that were experienced, because this foreign individual, if he didn't buy this block and went and bought another block, he was going to get hit with the 7% duty. So as much as he was not happy about the delays, he obviously didn't want to lose the block, because it was obviously better for him financially. And there goes the hat. Latest date for titles in the contract was the 1st of December 2018. 2018 in August, the surveyor was authorised to proceed with the survey work. By October, all the work was done and we were just awaiting clearances. Then the query was raised regarding the restrictive covenant regarding the BAL areas. Now, what they actually, in fact I've got the planning approval here. So in the approval, and this just shows you what a nonsense some of these things are. The condition was a plan is to be provided to identify areas of the proposed lots that have been assessed at BAL 40 or BAL flame zone. So they did the reports. Not one piece of land was identified or assessed within that fire range. So everyone thought, well, if there's no areas, why do we need a restrictive covenant that says habitable buildings are only to take place outside of areas identified as BAL 40 or BAL flame zone? So it was a nonsense condition that should have been objected to by the owner, by either his builder or his architect or the surveyor, because the BAL reports that they got before they made application for approval show that that site had none of these issues. They didn't apply to or make application to get that condition varied, therefore that condition stood. And as a result, we had to get a restrictive covenant drafted that was a nonsense. It was supposed to be signed by the, it's all right, this is coming off, but nothing else is, all right? It had to be signed initially by the local government authority, but when the local government authority agreed with us, that we didn't need the restrictive covenant, they refused to sign it. So you get into these ridiculous conversations with bureaucrats who are looking at an approval letter that says you must have this, and then other bureaucrats are saying, no, we don't need it, but we can't remove the condition. And the only way they would remove the condition is if we actually put in a brand new application to the WAPC. That wasn't going to happen. So November 2018, and again getting back to we're mindful of time frames, we arranged for a variation of the latest date for titles to the 9th of February. 30th of November it was agreed the covenant was not required, so it was removed from the deposited plan. Now before that, the deposited plan was sent to the surveyor to the solicitor to draw up the restrictive covenant. The restrictive covenant came to me and I'm thinking they've got it on the wrong lot. So I looked at the surveyor actually put it on the wrong lot. First mistake. Second time we get the covenant removed from the deposited plan. 21st of December, everyone goes AWOL for Christmas and everyone's running and ducking and diving. It's not my responsibility and we don't know what they're going to do. Frank Morello got involved and he was beating his head up against a brick wall very hard and didn't get through. Now on the 8th of January, we had to accept that covenant was required, but by this stage the Planning Commission needed it, not the local government authority. So the Planning Commission had to sign the restrictive covenant. Now, fortunately, my client's retaining this lot, so he is building a house to the required standards for bushfire alert level. This is downtown Mount Claremont. So we're not talking bush. There is bush there, but you know, it's not that bad. My client's retaining that block, but when he comes to resell, someone is going to have to explain to his buyer that there is a covenant on there that intimates there are some areas in that block that actually fall into these higher fire risk areas when there's not, and we have reports to prove it. Hopefully the family will never move out of that house and they don't actually have to deal with that. So because it was required, the surveyor then had to actually add it back to the deposited plan. Final deposited plan was lodged with Landgate and the Planning Commission on the 17th of January, I think it was, yes. 21st of January we requested urgent examination of the DP, and we also secured an extension for the latest date for titles to issue to the 28th of February. We got a consent letter from the mortgagee on the 23rd. On the 23rd of January, Landgate complied with our request or agreed to our request for urgent processing and placed the DP in order for dealings. 24th of January, the application for titles was lodged, and on the 29th of January, because we like to give them a bit of time, just let them settle in, they've got the document, let's see whether they're going to process it quickly. No, we lodged another request for urgent examination of the application. 31st of January, the titles were issued. And as I said, if you actually follow the Landgate procedure for urgent processing, they will do it. When we're acting for the seller, we will provide the buyer's conveyancer with the wording that needs to go in the letter. The letter doesn't need to come from the buyer. Particularly if you've got, hang on, let me rephrase that. If you have got a set date in your contract for settlement, a letter from the buyer's conveyancer will suffice for urgent processing. So they just essentially say, we know Haskins have lodged an application for urgent processing, we support it because the contract says it's got to settle on this date. And Landgate, so far, touch wood, have accepted them. Settlement occurred on the 21st of February. The known fees that we were aware of were $25,000. The unknown fees were estimated to be $36,000 plus. So the total cost in excess of $61,000 for a two-lot green title in Mount Claremont. Granted, the value of the land was sold for $790,000. So an investment of $60,000 is okay, but not everybody has access to $60,000 to drip feed over the 12 months that it takes to actually go through this process. So if people are coming to you and want to know about the costs, demolishing houses takes time and it's expensive. As I said earlier, this was the one where we paid $1,500 to the lawyer for a document that they got wrong, and then when we decided we didn't need the restrictive covenant, they still billed $1,500 in time. The seller also had to pay for the dividing fence to secure the second extension, which we didn't need in the end, but there was no point hoping that Landgate were going to issue titles in time. We needed to make sure we had sufficient time there. So as I said, make sure that your clients have got sufficient funds to cover all costs and contingencies. On the downside, this took 3 months longer than it should have done, which means my client's paying his mortgage for 3 months, rates for 3 months, all of the ongoing costs that they actually have to incur. Another simple one. 2-lot green title in Willagee. Application for approval lodged with Planning Commission 13th March. It was approved 2 months later. Clear title, no duplicate issued. Bonus. The conditions were to demolish the house and connect to sewer. Clear as... Sorry? Very simple. I love these ones. Water Corporation, Western Power and LGA. They're the standard clearances you require in every subdivision. We're required to prepare just an application for titles, and initially we were going down lot sync because the surveyor suggested that we do. That was fine. Dupe CT, no Dupe CT, not a problem. So yeah, it was as simple as they came. Contract was signed in July 2018. Latest date for titles to issue was 17th of February 2019. So the real estate agent had allowed more than enough time. More than enough time. October 2018, the house was demolished. That same month, the only outstanding condition or clearance was the Water Corporation. November, the surveyor was advising Alana we should be lodging the application for title in November. 17th of December, no progress with the sewer connection. Why? Because the sewer, on either side of the property, they had to get permission from the owner. On one side, there was a swimming pool, and on the other side, a dead cat. Buried in the backyard, though when I actually suggested this at one of the real estate sessions, they quite sarcastically said, "Are you sure it was just a dead cat?" Thinking. So in Bolter Street, Willagee, if they dig up a dead body, you heard it first, we thought it was a cat, but it could be. So neither of these owners would agree to allow the sewer extension to go through their properties. So 14th of January, the sewer issues were finally resolved. That is, the surveyor put it back to the Water Corporation. Why this surveyor was great, but why he didn't throw it back to the Water Corporation earlier, I don't know. Because
they got right of entry.
Well, it's not necessarily right of entry. You've still got to negotiate to actually get the access, because Willagee is still one of those areas. They had septic tanks. They've got to decommission them and connect and all of the rest of it. So at this point in January, we're now not doing lot sync. So the 7th of February, so nearly a month later after resolving the issues, we're still waiting on the sewer connection and the clearance. So we had to get the latest date for titles varied to the 19th of April.
Well, if they demolished the house earlier, would that make a difference?
If they'd what, sorry?
Demolish the house, like they signed a contract in July and then demolished the house in October.
They only got approval from Planning Commission on the 18th of May. So then to go through the council to get demolition and do what they need to demolish the house, anywhere from a month to 3 months to actually do that. But there's no doubt, I think if they'd gone to the Water Corporation earlier, instead of the surveyor trying to negotiate with them and realising potentially at the first appointment that they weren't going to give way, I think the swimming pool was not going to be affected by it, but the owner just, in their mind, just didn't believe that their pool was going to be looked after. And they obviously didn't believe that Bob the cat was going to be treated with any respect either. Or Bob the gardener, depending on whose body is actually down there. So I know when they, and I don't know as well what may have actually caused a delay in demolishing the house was he was waiting to get an offer. So you don't know what goes on with the actual owners with regards to that delay. So yes, we varied the contract, chat with where we are. So 19th of April, we need to get the titles. 26th of February, the final deposited plan was lodged with Landgate 3 months later than expected. Urgent request to examine the DP was lodged a month later. So again, we thought we've got time here. Landgate will do the right things. Their time frames are 10 business days and all the rest of it. They didn't. So 21st of March, the DP was examined by Landgate and sent to the WOPC. Problem was the WOPC forgot that they had it and they didn't sign it, so the surveyor had chased them up 10 days later. They returned it to Landgate on the 2nd of April. It was placed in order for dealing on the 3rd, and on the 4th the application for titles was lodged. The 5th urgent request was made. I'm beginning to think I'm running out of favours at Landgate because But if you follow what they want, they will comply, they will give it to you. And on the 8th of April, titles were actually issued. Bearing in mind, we needed titles by the 19th of April.
11 days.
How come you didn't lodge lot C?
I'm not quite sure why the surveyor changed his mind on that.
But it's the settlement agent who lodges lot C, not the surveyor.
No, surveyor has to note the survey as being lot
No,
sync.
they don't. It's changed.
And just let them know what, after we say we're lodging, they will then notify Landover respectively.
So you have to, if you're the settlement agent, lodging your application, you lodge your application, you let the surveyor know your application number, they go back into it, and they mark it lot C.
All right,
That
so
changed 6 months ago.
thank you.
Yeah.
So it's now changed. Yeah, you'll be able to swap over. So now, whereas I thought the surveyor drove the lodging of the lot sync, apparently now it's settlement agents that do that. So you can lodge your application. Sorry, can we just keep the... So we lodge the application even before the depositor plan is lodged?
You can, yeah. Personally, I don't like to do it in case the deposit plan changes. So if they've lodged the deposit plan, if you've done lot sync, you would have had titles the 5th of April.
A couple of days earlier.
Well, you wouldn't have had to lodge your request for urgent examination of your...
But even on lot sync, previous ones we've done, they're not processing them as quickly as they...
They process your application at the same time as they're processing the deposit plan.
That's the theory.
So, no, they do.
All right, so therefore lot sync, if you want to give it a go, maybe the next time we have, we'll try that one. Yes, Debbie.
I've got one at the moment, literally today, so the surveyors are then lodging the plan, and then I said, well, I don't know whether I'll have the consent in time, and they said, just let us know if you're ready to lodge it, we'll see if it's within 10 days, they can then do the lot sync, if not, they'll just let it go in order for dealing, and then we lodge later. So
Yep.
they're now not waiting for us to say, yes, it's lot sync or not, they're just lodging it and then seeing how it goes.
Right.
Because if you've lodged lot sync, the Landgate will prioritise the plan to a priority 1, otherwise you're left with priority
Oh, that was
3.
that newsletter they sent out quite some time ago, wasn't it now?
But you don't get to see the DP before you lodge.
No, you get the DP from the surveyor, but we'll keep on moving. But thank you for that. I didn't realise that they were actually that. I'm aware of that change, but have avoided lot sync because it just has not been any better than doing it down the traditional
It doesn't
way.
work unless you've got a clear title anyway.
Yeah, lot sync's a lot easier if you've actually got clear title, or you're appointed early enough and you can get your consent and everything else done in time. All right, so on this one, formal finance approval was then due the 1st of May, received 30th of April, settlement occurred 21 days later. Known costs on this one were 29,000, unknown costs $6,000. So total on this one was only 35,000, but it's all relative because the lot sold for 340,000 and 325,000. So that's still a fairly big chunk of investment on a price of that. So well worth it. In this particular instance, obviously there was a clear title, so there were no ongoing costs really for the seller, other than he obviously wanted to get one of the lots settled and move on. This one's a doozy. This was Liz and I and Alana. 3-lot green title in Mosman Park. So the backgrounds were, we started with 2 titles, they were being amalgamated to create 3 lots. They were 2 unrelated owners who owned the lots side by side. Each title was mortgaged to a different bank, Westpac on one, CBA on the other. The contract was signed to sell the middle lot owned by both owners on the 16th of May. The contract was conditional upon issuance of title, that's all it said. Joint form of general condition timeframes come into play because there's no latest date. Settlement was 14 days from issue of titles, and if that wasn't quick enough, they varied the contract in August to make it 7 days from issue of title, but not earlier than the 31st of October. Now, it was this particular example of a subdivision and that SAT decision that turned everything I knew about Duties Act on its arse. So in this case, this is just an example, and you'll probably see it better in your handouts, is the lots before and after the subdivision. So on the left is the lots before, so there were 2 houses on the 2 lots, and then they're created into 3 lots. Now this was attached to the contract, so we were aware of what was actually going on. It was also, a copy of the Planning Commission approval was attached as well. This one, the application was lodged with Planning Commission in November 2017, approved in February 2018, so 3 months. They had to remove/demolish the houses. Now, I've put that there because it's very important to the story. They also had to ID vegetation worthy of retention. Clearances were required from the usual suspects. The documents required were an application for titles, discharge of mortgage, partial discharge of mortgage. Can we keep the chatter down, please? Partial discharge of mortgage, authority to release deposit to secure partial discharge of mortgage. Still don't like that. Consent from mortgagee on title and transfer of land to put one lot into single ownership. All right, in April 2018, one house was removed. July 2018, we were all told the real estate rep was driving the process. July 2018, said real estate rep said, we're awaiting a demolition licence. September 2018, still waiting on a demolition licence. October, expect the demolition licence at the end of month. End of October, the second house was not demolished, it was removed. Now, how do I know that? Because in the Post newspaper is a photograph of my client out the front of the block with the house being removed. Now, the real estate agent has said, we're demolishing this house. Why didn't he say, we have to sell the house and then we've got to remove it? Then I'd understand why demolishing a house had actually taken so long. So never underestimate the value of your local paper or the West Australian in keeping up to date where nobody else is actually keeping you up to date.
And I don't think registered proprietors who have moved out either have that.
Oh, I'm not quite sure, actually, that might have been. I sincerely hope they weren't in the houses that got moved on. Actually, and that may very well be the point too, is that one of the owners may, as Liz has alluded, may not have wanted to get out earlier. So anyway, the surveyor was changed around this period of time and Liz was not informed. And in fact, in January, when Liz was following up the new surveyor, she was told they will be informed when the title's issued because the rep is all over it. Moving along, the final DP was lodged with Langate on the 18th of January. Liz was not instructed or appointed or instructed to prepare any subdivision documents until late January 2019. She should have been asked to do this in October to give her any chance of doing the things she had to do. The DP was sent to the WA Planning Commission on the 5th of February, and the time frame in the joint forms, as I mentioned earlier, meant they had to endorse their approval on the survey by the 19th of February. It was endorsed on the 6th of February, 13 days. Now, my client wanted this block. It's a moot point that he could have walked away, but it's there. The deposited plan was returned to Langate and was placed in order for dealing on the 6th of February. Now, again, licensed conveyancers do precision guesswork based on unreliable data provided by those of questionable knowledge. You need to commit this to memory, as well as making sure you keep telling yourself you're simply the best at what it is that you do. And money, 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 well, hopefully one day. So on the 8th of February, the CBA agreed to prepare a partial discharge of mortgage on the middle block, because what they wanted is we needed this unencumbered. So they agreed to prepare a partial discharge of mortgage and provide consent, providing the loan was paid down to 80% of LVR. That was estimated to be $35,000. Westpac on the other one were not owed any money, so they simply discharged their mortgage in full on PEXA. On the 14th of February, the one owner that needed to pay down his loan did not have any funds, so my client agreed to release the full deposit of 50 grand to enable the loan to be paid down. I had a conniption. My first thought was, no way that you're actually going to do this. Now, I also have to add at this point, the buyer is John Symington's brother. John Symington was a joint author of the Joint Form of General Conditions forever. So I said to David, have you spoken to John? He goes, yeah, he said it'll be all right.
But you forget to say who the seller was, who you would think would be flush with funds, who I will not name. And I'm looking at it saying that your debt is equal to the value of your home.
They're just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So apparently he spoke to John. Now John's retired, John probably couldn't give a toss. But I said to him, are you sure you actually told him you're releasing 50 grand with no security and no set settlement date at this stage? And he goes, I just want this to proceed. And if this makes it happen a bit quicker, then fine. At which point we have to then go, okay, I'm not comfortable with this, but it's his money. We've read in the Riot Act, so we agreed to release. And what did tickle me about this was, I said to Liz, can you find out what the debt is, the amount they want? She said it's about 35. So she went back to this owner and said, they'll release 35. Oh no, for administrative purposes and just to make things simple, can I have the whole 50? So he got the whole 50. We're okay, we ended up with a block, we're fine, but you know, when you're old school, and so my first connection was release the deposit, second connection was the fact that John Somington thought it was a good idea. The world has gone mad. So anyway, the 18th of February, the application for titles was lodged with Langate, and on the 13th of March they were requisitioned because they required a cost transfer to put the ownership of the middle block into two names. Now, again, going back to here, so in your booklet that you've got there, this middle lot, so 50 and 52, right down the middle of this block, the two owners, their land abutted. That had to get into one ownership. So they have to do a transfer. So the owner of 52 tells the guy at 50, you can have half of, I'm just going to do this simply, you can have half of 51. And the guy at 50 says to the guy at 52, you can have my other half of 51. So they end up with joint ownership. Of course, they've got to be stamped. 15th of March, the transfers were signed and lodged with OSR. We all expected a nominal assessment, and how wrong we were. They were sent to the VGO on the 25th of March, and on the 5th of April an assessment issued for duty of approximately $15,000 that nobody expected.
That's the difference between the 35 and the 50. Everyone knows.
Good job we gave him the money to pay his share of the stamp duty, actually. 15 grand. Are they appealing that, Liz?
Sorry?
Have they appealed that? Or did they decide not to?
Well, because of his position as well, I think he's got to appeal it. But someone will have to pay for the appeal.
Yes.
Because he hasn't got any money.
So yeah, so 15 grand.
You have to pay for appeal if you go back within those 60 days or whatever.
You still have to pay the stamp duty. They sold this block. They still had a contract. So the usual thing with duty, you can appeal your backside off, but you've still got to pay it. So 10th of April, the transfers were stamped and lodged with Langate. And the 15th of April, Langate erroneously issued a requisition again. So the title's issued at 4 o'clock on the 15th of April, which was the Monday before Easter. Remember, this is a 7-day settlement. Settlement is now due on Monday the 22nd of April, which is Easter Monday. So in short, we had 5 business days in which to settle. Thank God for cash, clear title and PEXA. So email documents, don't have to go and see anybody, everything's fine. So the documents were emailed to the client, returned the same day. The next day the monies arrived in trust from the buyer, and on the 23rd of April settlement occurred. Costs were unknown, but based on the previous examples would have exceeded 50 grand, and I don't think in that 50 grand I've actually added the $15,000 in stamp duty, so you're talking $65,000. The time frame from lodgement of application for approval to settlement was 17 months. And I've actually finished ahead of time. So if you were happy to take any further curtain calls, any more questions, please complete your feedback sheets. Please register for our next session that Steve talked about, and also our property breakfast on the 3rd of December. And remember, when all else fails, keep calm and carry on conveyancing. Anybody?